Have you ever heard that saying that all politics are local? Well, I have a new saying for you, and that saying is all podcasting is local. If you know anything about my backstory in podcasting, in spring of 2021, I launched my first podcast. It was a local community-based podcast in my hometown in Tennessee. I had no idea what I was doing other than we had to make this thing work. And since 2021, I've had politicians, reality TV stars, CEOs, journalists, influencers, inventors, and a long list of incredible guests that I had no business coming on my podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to tell you how I did it. Hello and welcome to Podcast for Profit. My name is Morgan Franklin. I'm a podcast producer, strategist, and educator. This podcast will help you create and grow a podcast that cuts through the noise of social media and speaks directly to your target audience. If you're ready to create a podcast that will align you with the experts in your industry, position yourself as a trusted leader, and create another source of revenue for your business, you're in the right place. I'll talk about this a little bit more throughout the episode, but in conjunction with this episode, I have launched my podcast pitch template. I swore that I would never, ever, ever sell this template because it is simply too good, and I wanted to keep it for myself. But this is the template that I have been using and perfecting and turning cold outreach into guests for years. And I know it is going to change your podcast. You can shop the template in the link in the episode description. For a little bit of context of this story, I'm not really a huge Bachelor or Bachelorette fan. In general, I just don't really like reality TV that much. I don't know why, because I'm exactly the kind of yappy, girls' night loving 30-year-old that would normally love this kind of TV. But yeah, I could just never really get into it. However, as I said, the girls' night loving gal I am, my roommate at the time was a full-fledged card-carrying member of Bachelor Nation. Every Monday night, there was a gaggle of girls with pizza and wine and fuzzy socks ready to watch the drama unfold. And because I'm no party pooper, and if there's fun to be had, especially if it's at my house, I'm gonna be having it. So here I come every Monday night to join the unholy trinity of group dates, Chris Harrison, and those rose boutonnieres that mysteriously stick onto fabric. As I was told every single season before, this season promised to be the most dramatic and insane and unbelievable yet. You are just not going to believe what happens. This has never happened in the history of Bachelor Nation. I promise that I'm not going to make you listen to the entire breakdown of the one season that I watched all the way through, but just know that I was as invested as any other red-blooded American suburban mom, and I still reminisce with my former roommate about how this might have actually been the craziest thing to ever happen in Bachelor Nation. This was in 2019, and spoiler alert, and if you might not remember, but a lot happened between 2019 and 2021. And during this time of me becoming a podcast producer and completely turning my life upside down, someone else was also turning their entire life upside down. The villain of that season of The Bachelor that I watched with my roommate. Yes, not only had he moved on from the show, he had moved to my hometown. Crazy, I know. I had no idea. It's those crazy glitch in the matrix things that happen like this that make me question if we do live in a simulation or not. Because, tell me why this reality TV star that even I knew about was moving to Hokey Poke, Tennessee. And of course, the answer is because my hometown is also the hometown of CrossFit champion Rich Froning, but it's still pretty crazy, right? On The Bachelorette, this guy was chewed up and spit out. He was maybe the most hated person to ever come out of the show. And you know what? Maybe he was that thing that had never happened in the history of Bachelor Nation. So my wheels are turning. It's spring of 2022 by this point, and I've been producing this podcast for about a year. We're doing well. We're getting some important people from around town. People are starting to listen to episodes without me personally begging them to listen. And yeah, overall, things are going pretty well, right? But once the information comes out that this guy has moved to town, I am all over it. I know we have to have him on the podcast. But how are we going to get him on the podcast? More importantly, how are we going to get him to talk about The Bachelorette on the podcast? Because it's pretty clear that he's moving on, and, that's understandably so. So let's get into how we make this happen. The first thing that you're going to have to do when you want to invite somebody that is out of your league onto your podcast, which, by the way, I hope that this is what you are always doing. There is no reason that you are staying in your comfort zone and inviting boring guests. And if you are, stop it. If you are, schedule a consultation with me, and I'm going to help you move past it, because step one is research. Do your research. What are they doing? What is the person doing that you want to have on your podcast? What are they promoting? What direction does it seem like their brand is going in? And how can you help them to go in that direction even more effectively? And let me just remind you, this is where brand clarity and direction on your own podcast really comes into play, because it's very hard to make a promise to a guest on how you're going to help them with their image or help their branding or help them rebrand by being on your show when you don't even know what your own show is trying to accomplish. Know why you want them to be on your show and what you're going to tell them specifically about why you want them to come on the show and why you like them, why you think that they are the person to come on and talk about this. Because let me tell you, flattery works, compliments work, and I think that they are so often overlooked. Give someone a compliment. Tell them genuinely why you want them to come on your podcast. The second thing is you have to look the part. This is where the podcast pitch template I was talking about earlier comes in, but I send every guest a beautifully designed, curated PDF that looks like $1,000,000. It looks like you're working with the most high-end professional podcast out there, and that is what I want them to think. That's what I want them to know. It answers the questions before they have the time to ask them. And if you do it right, it's going to seal the deal for you. Okay, so getting back to the story. So I know about this guy. I want him on my podcast. I'm doing my research. I find out why he came to my hometown, what the rebrand from reality TV is really looking like for him. And I craft a pitch that is so beautiful, that is for him, where we say, hey, we can help you accomplish all of the things, and we would love to have you on the podcast. And I'm not lying to you when I tell you, this was one of the fastest responses that I have ever got from a guest pitch before. I was on top of the world. I was so impressed. He told me that he would love to come on the show. Now, I wish that I could tell you this is where the story ends, but really, this is just where it gets started, because this is not where the story ends. And something that I'm going to personally warn you about is that the higher up on the totem pole you go with booking people, the more gatekeepers and appointmentsy people you are going to have to work with. The first exchange for this podcast interview happened in April. It took until July to get him on the podcast. It also took about half a dozen unanswered emails, a voicemail, and finally asking a friend of a friend of a friend if he could remind him about the podcast. And I do want to say for the record, if anyone has pieced together who this is, he was an incredibly kind person. He actually found out that the host of this podcast had some family that lived in Ukraine, and he was wearing a Support Ukraine t-shirt to the interview. He seemed like a very personable and thoughtful man, and he recently actually just got married and had his first child, and he still lives in my hometown, and I just could not be happier for his family. So if you do know who it is, I think that things turned out okay. Another thing that I want to mention is, and speaking of reality TV stars, around the same time, we got to interview the winner of The Voice for season 17. And he told me after the recording that the questions were the most thoughtful and well-researched questions that he had ever had. And I mean, this man had just came from being on Kelly Clarkson's show the day before. You better be writing the best questions that these people have ever seen, because another thing that is going to happen is their people are going to press you. They're going to say, okay, well, maybe send over a list of questions and basically we'll think about it. We'll think if we want to give you an appointment. And that's when you better have the questions that they have never answered on air before. And is that going to take work? Yes. Is it going to take time? Yes. You have no idea how many interviews, podcasts, articles that I've read from people so that I can have unique questions that they have never been asked before. But I will say, almost every single guest that I have on any of my shows always says, oh my gosh, I've never got questions like this before. So put in the effort. Because, if that fan who has no idea who you are is coming to listen to this episode and you're asking them the same crap that everyone else is, that is an instant skip versus them falling in love with you. The old saying is they come for the guest, but they stay for the host. So leave them something to stay with. Another thing is, and I know that you're going to be so excited, especially if you've booked a guest that could be a really big deal for your podcast, you have to limit the amount that you are talking about yourself. Again, people came for the guest. They did not come for you. The best thing that you can do is focus on giving the best experience to that guest and their fans with the hope that you pick up a few listeners from their audience. Going back to the gatekeepers for just a minute, though, the more important somebody is, oftentimes the more gatekeepers that you're going to have to go through to get to them. The more that they're going to give you the runaround on booking the dates and when the person is available and XYZ. Keep going. Keep emailing. We just had a senator on this same podcast, and it took me from July to November to get this recording. Keep going, keep messaging, and eventually, most of the time, if they think it's of value, it is going to happen. But how do you make sure it's of value? How can you guarantee that this guest being on your podcast will provide value for them? Well, you can't really, but what you can do is know your audience. Know who is listening to your podcast and why. And also, like I said earlier, all podcasting is local. Know your local community or know your community in your industry. Weak connections are everything in life and in podcasting. Make sure that when you're talking to people, especially when you're networking with people in your industry, you're asking, hey, do you know anyone that would be great for my podcast? I know that my hosts get sick of me because I am just reminding them over and over and over, when you're finished with this episode, don't let them walk out the door or sign off before you ask them, do you know anyone else that would be good for this podcast? Because great guests know great guests. So utilize your network. Make sure that the people around you know what kind of guests you're interested in, and let them know who you are looking for. Do your research. Look the part. Then, when the time comes, be the part. If you want to shop my podcast pitch template, it will be in the episode description. This is the exact template that I have sent to secure over 400 guests. And also, I just want to say, I have received a lot of podcast pitches as a producer, and I have never seen anything like this. One more thing before we go. I just want to give you the permission to pursue the guests that you want to have on your show. I know that this can be really intimidating and make you question a lot of things about yourself and your podcast and whether you are worth having this kind of guest on. And I have been very, very fortunate to have people around me, both professionally and personally, that always encourage me and cheer me on and tell me that no matter how crazy it is, that just to go for it. And I want you to know that you are worthy and you are capable of doing anything and everything that you put your mind to. Keep going. Keep pursuing what you want. Keep sending that follow-up email. And as always, I can't wait to listen to your podcast. Hey, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. If you enjoyed the podcast and you'd like to hear more episodes like this one, go ahead and subscribe to the show. New episodes air every Monday morning. And if you found this episode valuable and you want to help other business owners and podcasters, will you leave me a 5-star review? It helps the show rank higher in the charts and brings more entrepreneurs the information they need to start making money on their podcast.